And so all five of us together knew exactly what we were doing, what we needed to do to make money, how many calls I needed to make, the path that we were going on. We tracked our goals. So specifically, we had this big window that I sat in front of, and we would write every deal up on the window. And if we got to 7, everybody got a bonus. If we got to 10, we got to go do something fun. So we knew exactly what we were driving towards.
Leadership was just as boots on the ground as the salespeople. That feeling of knowing that somebody is in the trenches next to you is really, really helpful.
I really think that in sales, if our salesperson feels confident in making decisions and doesn't have to go through a whole lot of red tape to be able to get something across or get something done, we see a lot more success. To another episode of Outbound On Air. I am one of your hosts, Kristen, and I am joined today, as always, by Ben. And today, Ben, we are going to be talking about setting up the environment for your sales professionals to be able to thrive. So I want to kick this off with a question to you. A lot of times we hear this in the word culture, right? We have company culture, we have sales culture, but is that really what we need to define for our sales department, or is it environment? How do you think about setting this up for our sales team or for our salesperson?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think we've all heard the term culture get kicked around for years. And it's definitely in like the buzzword category. I don't I prefer not to use the term culture because I think there's connotations with it that maybe are not like what's intended. When I think culture, I think things like, core values, certainly, hey, we have fun together, we're a family. Like I think that stuff is good on the surface. Like I don't have any issue with those concepts, right? But I don't think that the term culture is like particularly helpful when it comes to like defining, what our company represents. And I actually prefer the term environments, and kind of posted about this on LinkedIn. I think environments is a little bit more helpful because when I think about environments, I think about like a setting, right? And I think about, being set up for being successful, right? Like we all operate in some sort of environment, and there are rules and expectations and, kind of an operating reality that exists within that then I or your salesperson can then thrive in, right? Like they're set up for success. And so when it comes to environment, what I think is really important is really that idea of being equipped with what's needed to go and be successful, right? So a lot of people, I think, okay, I've got to find somebody that has good sales experience, right? They develop the right skills, maybe they have industry knowledge, right? But that in and of itself, I don't think is really enough for success to happen, right? And of course, there's always your rock star salespeople that, regardless of what's in front of them or what's around them, they're gonna figure out a way to be successful. But even for those people, I think that they will perform better when they are in a place where the right support is there, incentives are
Mhm.
aligned, right? I think that's kind of what I mean by environment versus culture. And so I'm excited to dig into some of the things I think really, really matter when it comes to that. I want to throw a question your way though, Kristen. As you think about your career and the different places that you've been, you know, what to you is sort of stands out for environment, right? Like what are if it wasn't like one particular, nobody's perfect, right? So it doesn't have to be a particular place, but what are kind of the elements that you found are really important in terms of an environment for somebody to go be successful?
Yeah. So whenever I think through it, I definitely places came to mind that were more exciting environments to be in and then less
Sure.
exciting environments. And
Yeah.
I think that the key thing for me was always if everybody knew the goals of the
Mm,
company. The first
yeah.
team that I worked on, there was 5 of us, and 2 of them were licensed agents and 3 of us were support, right? And so all 5 of us together knew exactly what we were doing, what we needed to do to make money, how many calls I needed to make, the path that we were going on. We tracked our goals. So specifically, we had this big window that I sat in front of, and we would write every deal up on the window. And if we got to 7, everybody got a bonus. If we got to 10, we got to go do something fun. If we
Yeah.
got past that, I mean, the sky was the limit as far as what we could do. So we knew exactly what we were driving towards. So me generating the leads, our transaction coordinator, making sure that everything was staying on place, our admin, making sure that we had everything that we need. We were all just rowing in the same direction, if you
Mm.
will. And so for me, whenever I look at the places that have been successful, for me, I knew exactly what we were working towards, and everybody else did as well. And we were able to go in the same direction. And whenever I look at the ones that were not, I feel like that was a key thing that was missing, that
Mm.
leadership maybe knew what the direction was, but that wasn't then communicated back to the rest of the team. And so I think,
Yeah.
especially as it relates to sales and in our industry specifically, the sales helps to drive the revenue. There is the retention piece, but whenever we're looking at growth, it's the sales side that is really going out and doing this growth. So if the two sides of this coin, the sales and the operations, are just not on the same page, we're not going to be able to move forward. So that causes a lot of conflict. And so that's kind of where I see biggest success and great environments to work in, is whenever there is a goal and we all know where we're going, and everything that we are doing within our day is in service of that goal or that next milestone that we're looking to reach.
Yeah. That's really good, Kristen. I think clarity. There's a couple of things that jumped out at me that you said. One, clarity, right, around what we're doing. Like, obviously, baseline, we all understand we're here to do a job, right? But what is the
Right?
direction that we're rowing in, right? I think that that is important. And you also mentioned leadership, right? Like, I think I've worked in environments where leadership was, just as boots on the ground as the salespeople, right? And so it
Hmm.
was that that feeling of knowing that somebody is in the trenches next to you is really, really helpful versus kind of just being given like a directive and, you know, hey, good luck, go, best best of luck to you. And that scenario, like, it may not, that leader may be perfectly willing and able to help, right? But they're not kind of taking that more
Right.
direct hands-on approach. So I think having that can definitely be a big asset, as you're working towards that goal.
Absolutely. And I think so, as it then specifically relates into the sales department there, what I think is funny is, as you were saying that, I was thinking about the first team I worked with. Yes, we were all boots on the ground. We were all out there grinding every single day. Whereas then in larger companies, the owner is off doing whatever the owner
Yeah.
wants to do. And then they would come in after a conference, after they had this amazing conversation, and then come and sit down in my office and say, Kristen, I want you to do this, 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 and this. I don't care how you do it. You just need to go and make it happen. Now, for me, great. You're not going to give me any rules. You're just going to tell me what you want me to do, and you're going to let me go and figure that out. That works really well for me, and I imagine Ben, probably you would fit pretty well in that too, because we're creative, we're entrepreneurial, like we're going to figure it out. Now, for our very, I don't want to say traditional salespeople, but for a lot of the salespeople that we're working with, where process is needed, where this direction is needed, this kind of like swoop in, swoop out approach does not necessarily create the best environment. So I think that one of the key things is to determine, what do the people on your team need and what don't they need? Because
Mm.
if they don't need you involved in the everyday stuff, being able to give them a little bit of autonomy to be able to make some decisions. And so I think that what's interesting there is building these parameters around, where are you allowed to go and where is the red zone? What decisions are you allowed to make
Um,
on your own and what do you need help with? Because where I've seen people be really successful is when salespeople are given that autonomy and they are able to go out and create. And I think that, we've talked a lot about this specifically in outbound, and having some of that creative freedom to be able to go out and figure out what's going to work best for that sales person. So, Ben, whenever you're thinking about, sales, outbound specifically, this is outbound on air here, but whenever we're
yeah.
building this specific sales environment, how much like creative liberty or freedom should we be giving to our salespeople?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there is an element of what the person's skill set is, like you said, right? Like, there are
Mhm.
definitely people that just they want to be handed the playbook and told exactly what to do, right? And so in that case, it's going to be a little bit different. But ideally, you have somebody that is excited about the idea of testing different things and trying different messaging and methods and approach, right? And so I think giving that person giving that person the big picture, hey, this is where we're trying to get to. Like, I'll just to use an example, like you may say, hey, like our mission is we want to educate investors on how to really grow and build wealth through real estate. And so that ties into our messaging because we're not just calling and or emailing and mailing and pitching people our services, right? Our approach is we want to educate them and help them. So if
Help
that's the
them.
case, then I would say giving your salesperson as much freedom as possible to try different things within that is really good. Now, the obvious, like, parameters that they're operating within is, hey, we're not doing multifamily, right? Like, like you do want to be clear about it. Back to our last
Right.
episode, you do want to be clear about who your ideal client is and what the company
Mhm.
is set up to do. But the reality is like if somebody is just doing the same thing over and over again, like you gave them a script and said, hey,
Mhm.
this is the script you need to use. Well, they're going to get weeks and weeks into it, and if they're not having success, they're going to blame the script, right? It's
Mhm.
essentially your fault because you handed them the script, and they're doing what you said, and they're not having success, right? And so, I think the idea of ownership over the approach is really helpful then because now it's not you gave me a script and it's not working. It's hey, I'm continuing to try to get better. I'm firing off all sorts of different angles and approaches and
Mhm.
again, like not all personalities are wired that way, but I think if you have somebody that is creative and wants to think critically about this stuff, then they're going to thrive in that sort of environment versus kind of just being told what to do,
Yeah.
right? So that's what comes to mind for me. Yeah, anything you would add to that?
No, I think that having having everything set up in the way that plug and play is the way that I like to think about it with some, again, just what do we want to see? What don't we want to see? A lot of times I advocate for a specific budget to be set for
Yeah.
our initiatives here. If it falls within, $100, you have free reign to do what you need to do. If it's going to be more than $500, don't know where that number came from, but if it's going to be more than $500, you've got to come talk to me as the owner and we need to approve this here. So I'm big on just really setting out and thinking through all of these kind of, well, what happens if this happens? What happens if this happens? To try to then just build some of these things so that because I really think that in sales, if our salesperson feels confident in making decisions and doesn't have to go through a whole lot of red tape to be able to get something across or get something done, we see a lot more success whenever we have a little bit more our hover parents maybe, right? Where they're or helicopter
Yes.
parents. There we go. Helicopter
Yes.
bosses
Yeah.
there, where they're just constantly monitoring. And that's where it becomes a little bit of, a different type of environment there that success can still be had, but you have to make sure the right person's in the right seat there because I don't know, if you had me in that position and you were helicoptering me, I don't think that I would be
Yeah.
successful in that type of environment.
Well, let's spend a little bit of time there, Kristen, because
Yeah.
I think this is management style is one of the most critical elements
That's
of
exactly where I
envi
was gonna pivot to next,
that
Ben. Like, we're on the same wavelength there.
we're
Yes,
on the same
management
wavelength. That's
style.
great. That's great. And listen, I'm sure you have worked for people in the past. Hopefully it wasn't me. It worked for people in the past who were let's say the word micromanagers. That's what we're
Gosh.
talking about here. I'm sure you've worked for folks like that in the past. I know I have. And I think I don't think that people inherently want to be micromanagers, right?
Right.
I think it comes from a place of being afraid to relinquish control, right?
Mhm.
But the reality is that creates a really difficult environment. I would say for most people, right? Even the
Mhm.
person that is looking to have the playbook handed to them, right? They want to be told what to do in a sense. It still doesn't feel good, right? Because you can almost sense this lack of trust that exists
Sure.
between salesperson and manager. So I'm curious, Kristen, in your experiences where you've worked with someone who is a little bit, like, the nice term would be a little bit more hands-on with their management style. how did that impact you in terms of your performance and your day-to-day as a salesperson?
It was hard, right? And it's definitely not you, okay? First of all, you're my favorite person that I
Okay,
have
good.
ever worked for
Okay.
because you
Alright.
let me just do whatever it was, right? And then anyways, there was very open communication. It was perfect. However,
Thank
so I just wanted to make sure that you knew I'm not talking about you here. But
you.
I think that it impacted a lot of productivity because if I'm in the flow and I am, in my sales pitch, I'm doing something, whatever it is, I am then in the back of my mind worried about 500 other things, whether those are heavy admin tasks or those are, I don't know, just judgment in the way that I am selling
Sure.
there to where it almost made me afraid to show up and sell the way that I knew how to sell. And then I started saying things that didn't quite align with
No.
how I truly wanted to sell. And so it just created some misalignment internally to where then the product of that was I'm not hitting goal. I am behind on targets. My emails are never good enough, right? I am missing commas, too many commas. Oh, why are you using 7 exclamation marks? Well, because I'm really excited about this email. I don't know, right? But just making sure that it just created a hard place to be in. And so I did not stay very long at that job because I just felt completely inadequate. And there was nothing at the end of the day, there was nothing that I could do, even if I knew it was my best, that would be the best for this person that I am working for. And so for me, it just wasn't a fit. So I knew that I could walk away and find something else that I wanted to do.
No.
But other people stay in it. And then it just creates such tension, such negativity in the role. But then also you carry a lot of that outside of work as well. So I've worked in those situations. Have you ever worked in that situation? How did that impact you?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think it comes across a lot of times and, certainly in the instances I've experienced, I think it's well intended, right? If they didn't care, they wouldn't be so invested,
Right.
right? It's just a level of like, all right, well, to what extent do you trust me to go out
Mm-hmm.
and execute, right? And in some ways you'd argue, right? Like, well, if you don't trust me to go and execute and do what I know how to do, then you shouldn't have hired me, right? You
Right.
know what I mean? Like, I think that's kind of like the core question that it comes down to. But from like the salesperson level, I totally agree. Like the
Mm-hmm.
mental aspect as a salesperson, you're already dealing with trying to get a prospect's attention, trying
Right.
to stay focused on taking the steps that you know you're supposed to do every day while getting rejected, while, not hearing back from people, having great conversations and then following up for weeks thinking like, why isn't this person getting back to me?
Mm-hmm.
I thought we really connected, right? So it's like it's an extra element on top of all that stuff that's hanging over your shoulders at every turn, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, to be clear, you've hired someone, you've brought them in, they're new, right? Like, I think it's totally reasonable to expect to be a little bit hands-on early while
Right.
they kind of get a feel for things and you're training them and you want to make sure that, they have a good understanding. But I think even then there's a way to do it in a way that doesn't feel like micromanaging. And one of the things that I've always done when I managed salespeople is, essentially ask a question like, "What do you need? Like, what do you need from me?" Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you approach it in that way, it comes much more across like, "Hey, I'm here to support you,"
Right.
rather than "I'm here to make sure you're doing the job exactly the way I want it done." Right?
Absolutely.
And that's not to say, listen, I'm not saying that salespeople don't have blind spots, and sometimes you need to step in and say,
Right.
"Hey, we need to talk about this thing." But I'm talking about like the daily activity, the weekly flow that your salesperson is in, right? How are you setting up them to be successful
Mm-hmm.
versus kind of monitoring them to make
Right.
sure that they're doing it a certain way, if that makes sense?
Absolutely. And something that I have observed, and this is rooted in nothing other than my observation here, is
Sure.
whenever you have somebody who has been a salesperson and they are now managing another salesperson, they're approaching it as a coach. Like they're approaching it as, I'm here to help you. We're on the same team. We're working together.
Right.
And whenever we have somebody who has not necessarily been in sales, had a sales role, or is sales minded, they approach
Mm.
it as a boss, as a manager, as you have to hit these numbers, and the numbers are never rooted in anything factual, right? And regardless of kind of where you're at, it's like, oh no, you're not hitting the numbers. Oh, you're not doing this. Oh, you're not doing that. And
Right.
so it's this point of separation that I have observed there, to where people have been in sales, coach, people who have not been in sales and manage salespeople, manage. And a lot of times they tend to towards the micromanaging. And
Yeah.
sometimes I think that it comes from, again, a well-intentioned place, but, oh, if you do X, Y, and Z, then it should equal this, or 1 plus 2 should always equal 3. But in sales, it doesn't. 1 plus 2 may equal 77. And we're like, I don't know why, but that's just the way that it happened, right? And so it's just understanding that there is this point of differentiation in our sales team and our ops team, and that
Yeah.
the way that we approach management there is a little bit different, to where we
Yeah.
want to make sure that we're staying on track and figuring out. To me, it always comes down to, yes, we should root this in numbers, because that's going to allow us to
Yeah.
see on track, off track. So what are our leading indicators and what are our lagging indicators? What are the true metrics here that we should be looking at? If we really only care about revenue, like that's our number one driver, then we shouldn't be talking about, other things that don't necessarily align with that. We shouldn't be tracking these numbers that don't directly align with getting us more revenue. So making sure that we're really looking at this. And then I also think it comes down to frequency of meetings and the types of meetings, the tone of those meetings that we're having, one-on-ones. I don't know, some people go EOS and have L10 meetings, but I'm curious from you, Ben, what frequency do you recommend for one-on-ones? Are you a fan of one-on-ones? How do you think that a manager should check in with their salesperson?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's sort of it scales down based on experience, right? So, I'm working with somebody right now onboarding a new outbound salesperson, and you know, we're meeting twice a week, right? Like
Yeah.
Tuesday, Thursday check-in. Like I think it's important to have a lot of touch points early, because
Mhm.
every day you're getting, you're getting a new objection, or you're uncovering something in the process. Frequency of questions is going to be a lot more. So I think when you get started, it's good to have that frequency, because a lot of it
Mhm.
is training, right? But once you get to a point, I think where it's somebody is more comfortable in the seat, right? I think I would say a a deep dive conversation once a month. And that's like,
Mhm.
let's really get into how did the prior month go over all the
Mhm.
KPIs, what worked, what didn't work, what are we focused on for the upcoming month, right? Like really intensive conversation. But I do think it's worth having either weekly or bi-weekly check-ins
Yeah.
between those, right?
Mhm.
Because the KPI, like the deep dive conversation, like if you're doing that every week, like that feels like a lot, right?
Right.
Once you get to the point where your salesperson knows what they're supposed to be doing and what they should be doing, you really don't. I would say like maybe you still have them update the sheet every week, but like you don't need to have this deep conversation every
Right.
every week. On the flip side, though, like once a month in like at all is probably too frequent, and
Mhm.
I'm is yeah, it's probably too infrequent in terms of like general touch points.
Sure.
Uh, because like here's something that I've observed. I'm sure you've observed. I was talking to a friend recently, had a salesperson, really, really great month, right? And then the 2 months after, really, really bad, right? That person then proceeds to quit the third month, right? So like, and I don't know the frequency at which this person was meeting with their salesperson, but like it's just to show you like, okay, if you have like back to back really bad months and there's only two touch points in there, like you're sort of teetering towards like I can almost tell you what the result is going to be before it happens, right?
Yeah.
So I would say it's important to have check-ins that are almost a little bit more like, what can I help you with? How are
Mhm.
things going? what do you need, right? Less so like deep dive KPI, more like
Right.
mental support, like make sure their head's still in the game, figure out if
Mhm.
they're running into, because I think one of the great traits of a lot of salespeople is this like independent, like go getter. The flip side is like when they start checking out, like they're not necessarily going to raise their hand and be like, "Hey, I'm checking out." And that's
Right.
probably unique to salespeople. So I don't know. That was a long-winded answer. How would you answer that question?
No, that same. I followed you all the way through that. And
Okay,
yes,
great.
I no, I definitely agree with that. I've seen that happen often with people not reaching out to their salesperson because
Yeah,
usually, you know, whenever I get called in, it's not into a great situation. We're not like, oh, we're not hitting goal every single month. And now all of a sudden, oh, Kristen, we need your help. It's usually into these situations where we're underperforming and we're not meeting the standards that we need to meet. And I would say the number one thing that where I'm like, okay, well, what's going on? Oh, I don't know. What's your salesperson's numbers? Oh, I don't know. And there
mhm,
is just how often are you meeting with them? Probably not often enough. And so I
yeah,
think that whatever that cadence is that you decide to meet, I think by monthly, so every other week at a minimum should be when we're checking in. I agree
yeah,
with you that once a month, the deep dives, I like to do those right near the beginning of the month, whatever that first Monday is, and just how did last month go? What's the goal for this month? Let's figure out what we need to do to move forward. How can I support you? And then those other check-ins, sometimes they're pretty serious, right? They're like, "Hey, I've got this
sure,
deal. I don't know how to do it. They've asked these questions. They've
right,
gone ghost. What do I do? Or my pipeline's really stalled in this place." Great. Other times we just, "What did you do this weekend? Oh, did you have fun?
yeah, right,
How's your mom? How's this?" Like making sure that they are okay as well. So it's this blend there to where then whenever you are managing, you should know about your people, right? Like I had one lady, woman, person that I'm working with, and she has really, really big months coming up. I mean, of deals that she's got to do back to back to back. And we talked about the work that it's going to be required to make that happen. But I
mm,
know that her birthday is in August. So I said, hey, the next 3 months are going to require a lot of work. I was like, you should go ahead and put in your PTO now for this time and take a break. So you have something coming up, something that you can look forward to, but it's because I know the work that she has to do over the next couple of months and know that she appreciates and likes quality time. She likes to rest and recharge. And so that's where that suggestion comes from. Is that the right thing for everybody? No. But as a manager and getting in and understanding that your people are, I think you said this on a past episode, but your person is not their numbers. They're a
right,
full, well rounded individual that has interests outside of just working at your company. And so
yeah,
when coming to manage them, especially salespeople, because you're asking salespeople a lot of time to give up other things outside of work to do what has to happen inside of work. So it's important to understand what it is that recharges them, what it is that helps them. And then as you're having these other meetings, you bring some of those things up. You ask them questions. You get to know their goals. What are they striving towards? Because you want to make sure that you strike that balance whenever it's like, hey, go out here and get rejected 150 times, then
right,
understanding of like, oh, you've had a really bad week. I think you should take half a day on Friday, Ben, and go play a round of golf. Like that's my professional recommendation to you is that you should go do this, right? Because I know this has been really hard. This is what I know of you. Here's what and that to me is like peak manager on all sides is understanding that your people are not just employees. They are
yeah,
full, well-rounded people.
yeah. Well, and I think the reality is like in terms of the frequency,
Mhm.
there's room for like different approaches,
Absolutely.
but at a minimum, like you need to have like a set thing. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, hey, we're gonna meet every other week, or we're gonna meet once a month. Like not having an established cadence, that's the
Dangerous.
worst answer. That's the wrong answer, right? And I would hope most people do. So hopefully that if you're not, just get something set and stick to it, and put together even just a very rough agenda of highs, lows, what do you need help with, right? Like,
Mhm.
you don't need to overcomplicate it, but you do need to have those touch points for sure, because there are things that your salesperson will be frustrated about in their day
Absolutely.
to day. And if you don't know what those things are, you're setting yourself up for failure, right? One of those things, and you brought this up earlier, and I think this plays a huge role in environment, is that relationship between sales and operations, right?
Mhm.
Salespeople, when I'm sure we've talked about this before. Salespeople, they're out making it rain. They're taking Friday afternoon off to play golf, whatever, right? Like, they're just
Mhm.
kind of doing whatever they want. Operations is over here meeting all
Fulf
the promises that the
Exactly.
salesperson has delivered, right? Like, it's work, right? There's more on their plate now. So I'm curious, like, if we're thinking about a great environment for
Mhm.
sales, right? In all likelihood, that also means that there's a great environment for operations happening too, right? Because if those are way out of sync, then somebody's not having a good experience, and something is going to
Right.
go horribly wrong. Talk to me a little bit about, I'm going to keep this a little bit open-ended
Mhm.
intentionally. How do you view that split, right? And you've worked as a BDM in a property management company,
Mhm.
right? Like, what does lead to success in terms of a relationship between sales and operations?
I think having a deep understanding of what operations does. I think that
Mhm.
a lot of times I've seen salespeople fail because they don't actually understand what it takes to manage the property. And they want to go out and they want to give discounts. And I just have to say this, but I'm sure we may talk about this like in a different episode, but discounts do not close deals. Okay. They don't, because it's the same amount of work that is required and people are just paying us less to do it. So, anyways,
Yep.
the salesperson thinks the option is just discounts or whatever, right? Is because they don't value what it is that the operations team does. And so I think that making sure that there is some cross training or cross observation there for the salesperson to deeply understand what our operations people are doing. Because it's really easy as a BDM. And when I was one, I did not understand or value this at all. I was not a great teammate BDM. I was a really great salesperson BDM. But as far as
Mhm.
if you went and asked all the property managers I worked with, they'd be like, "Oh, Kristen brought on really bad properties," because they didn't understand what
Right.
it was that they actually had to deal with. And so I think that making sure that there is that empathy across the board between what it is that our ops people have to do, because that is really what we're selling in property management is our operations people, is our ops team. And if we don't have confidence in them or we don't have understanding in their value, it's very easy to devalue their services. So
Mhm.
building that relationship first, I think sales has to understand what operations is doing. And operations needs to understand what the goals are for the salesperson.
Yeah.
Operation needs to know and have input in the fact that we're looking to add 30 properties in July, but each of you
Yeah.
have 180 renewals in July also. So then a conversation around who's going to onboard
Yeah.
these people. Do we have capacity to support these sales goals? So then making sure that our sales goals are not just rooted in this arbitrary number that we just want to hit, but is actually rooted in this idea that we can support the number of deals we're bringing on and that our ops people understand if you need help, we're going to get you help. If you're overwhelmed, here we're going to make sure that you have what you need. Here is your capacity, and we don't want you managing more than X number of doors because this is how. So constant check-ins with the ops team as well to make sure that they're not overwhelmed. So as the salesperson is closing deals, understanding which property managers have capacity at that time to onboard these properties. And
Yeah.
if they don't have capacity, that's now an issue that we're discussing together as a team. So I think
Yeah.
making sure that these two sides work cohesively is understanding what the ops actually does, that it is not just, oh, they just put the property up for rent and then they get an application. Like there's so many things that go
Yeah.
into that process. And then the ops team feeling like they have a voice in the growth as well. You may run into people that are change adverse, right? Most people don't love change, but making sure that they're feeling heard and that they're feeling understood and that we understand their capacity as well. Because if our sales goal is to go out and bring on 400 new deals this year, this year, but our ops team is at max capacity, it's not going to work. Everyone's going to be upset at each other because the two sides were not considered in building out these goals.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Kristen. And just to add on, like from the salesperson perspective, like amongst all this rejection that's happening and the difficult work of bringing on new doors, if the attitude from ops every time a new door comes in is sort of this like groan, like that's super, it's super demotivating to a salesperson. And so you you know, you can set this ambitious goal for your
Mm-hmm.
salesperson, but if you know that it's gonna cause operational challenges, like, what you can expect to happen is that salesperson to get that feedback, to get the you know, feel the frustration, even if it's not, like, directed at them, but it's just kinda like, deep sigh, "Okay," like, "Great," like, that's not gonna make the salesperson feel like they're in an environment where they're valued, right?
Right.
So I think there's a balance to be struck, right? Like, and I've worked in companies that are on both sides, like
Mm-hmm.
very sales forward, like we don't care what, not we don't
We'll
care.
just figure, no, it's we'll figure it out. It's a we'll figure it
We'll
out
figure it out.
company. We're gonna go sell it and then we'll figure it out
That's
on
right.
how
That's
to produce or how to fulfill on that.
That's right. Which is a great sales environment to work in the sense that, you know, you have all the tools and resources at your disposal to go be successful. Like that's a very good thing. But you're gonna churn ops people. You're gonna
Absolutely.
churn clients because you know, you're not paying attention enough to what's happening after the deal's closed. So I think it's a balance to be struck, but it absolutely like don't for a second think that it's not going to impact your salesperson if they're getting resistance at every turn. And it's not your salesperson's job to fix that, right?
Right.
As a business owner or a leader, like you've got to figure out like if you're really committed to your goals and the
Mm-hmm.
salesperson goals, they're doing what's being asked of them. And so, you know, this isn't a we're not going to solve this in a 45-minute podcast for everybody, but it is just something to be attentive to because I think a lot of
Absolutely.
times, you know, you might have a salesperson that's being successful and they might leave and you might be sitting here, well, why, wait a second. Like, why would you want to leave? Like, obviously you're being successful, but if that
Absolutely.
salesperson isn't, you know, they're not feeling appreciated or they're not feeling supported, like they're going to go find something else to do. So,
Absolutely.
um, yeah.
I think one of the other key things here for just touching back to the sales side is making sure that there is a clear plan of what we want to do. I
Yeah.
have been working with teams recently that have absolutely no numbers been. It's a little bit shocking to me to be like, "What's your 2025 goal?" And they're like, "Whatever." And I'm like, "Oh, your poor salesperson." Because
Yeah.
then whenever you come and you say, "Oh, Kristen, oh, Ben, my salesperson sucks. They're not doing what they're supposed to do." What's their goal? Oh, I don't know. So you have no real way to determine if they're doing what you want them to do or what you don't want them to do because you have
Yeah.
no goals and no expectations for them. So if
Yeah.
we are having this feeling that I think my salesperson's not doing what I want them to do, then we go back and we look internally at process and at our management style here of what tools have we given them in order to be successful?
Yep.
What roadmap have we given them and expectations have we communicated of what does define success and what does not define success? And so if we haven't given this person these things, it's not their fault that they are not showing up and closing 500 deals for you. They don't know that you want 500 deals. They may think you only want 10. They may hear from the ops team, we're overwhelmed, so they're not going to go out and close because they know that their ops team is overwhelmed and there is
Right.
no feedback loop to be able to give that back. So I think that one of the most important things for the sales environment is to figure out what in the heck you actually want this person to do. How much outbound are we saying is enough outbound? What does that really look like? How many deals should they be closing per month? How much time are we going to give them to ramp up on outbound? Because we know it may
Yeah.
take 4 to 6, maybe even 9 months or a year to really get everything going and making sure that that's communicated. Because on one side, the salesperson may think that they're doing fine and everything is not fine. Or a salesperson is going to think that they're doing terrible, but they're actually doing great because they have no metric for
Right.
success at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. Yeah. That ramp up piece I think is critical, right?
Hmm.
Like you had a BDM and they were closing 10 doors a month. You hire a new BDM, you expect month one, oh, they're going to close 10 doors a month, right? Like that's not how it works, right?
Right.
Like it takes time to get someone up to speed, and particularly with outbound, right? So much of it comes down to the timing of your outreach.
Right.
Like the work that you're doing today, the people you're reaching out to today, they may not be clients for 3, 6, 9, 12 months plus, right? And so
Absolutely.
I think you have to have not only expectations for yourself as a manager to be able to say, okay, is this person, are they doing the things that we're asking them to do? Right.
Hmm.
Like I always really encourage people early on with a new salesperson, the emphasis is on activity, right? Like
Right.
it's how many calls, how many conversations, right? Like those are the sorts of things that we're really paying attention to. Because at the
Mhm.
end of the day, like there is no better window into the motivation of your salesperson than their daily and weekly activity. Like,
Right.
I mean, we've probably all worked around salespeople that quiet quit or managed them. And far and away, the most obvious sign of that is the amount of activity being put in, right?
Yeah.
So it's not only as
Absolutely.
important as a manager to know what to look for
Hmm.
and be on the look for, especially in that ramp up period, but it's also critically important in the way that you manage your salesperson
Right.
because they hopefully have their own high expectations of their performance. And
Hmm.
when they're, a few weeks in, a month in, 2 months in, and they're not closing deals every week, right? They're going to have a level of frustration about how it's going. And
Right.
they're motivated to make commission. And so you don't want them to be in this state of kind of discouragement about the job that they're doing. You need to be the one that's there saying, hey,
Sure.
you're putting in the work. I see the evidence of the effort you're putting forth, and that's a good thing. Keep going. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
I Something that just came to mind as you're saying this is while we've been saying how you manage salespeople, I think that some of these are just universal rules or universal lessons for managing everyone on your team. And
Yeah.
I think that what I have found to be true here in our property management industry is if somebody's not a great sales manager, they are generally also not a great manager of
Mm.
their team. And so I think that having that desire, if that's something that you see as a weakness for yourself, that you don't want to manage people. You like property management or you like your business, you like doing what you do, but you don't want to manage people, then your next hire should probably be somebody to manage your people because otherwise everyone's going to be running around in different directions. Everybody's going to be doing what they want to do. They're going to be telling you how you should run your business. And if that's not a strength that you have, you need to bring somebody in to manage that team for you. And if you are somebody who does like to manage, but you may be on the micro side of that management, then maybe you need some coaching around how do I approach this with my team? How do I help my salesperson? A great way is how many people have quit in the last year. If it's a significant number, you may be the problem. Like it may be you that is the issue here,
Yeah.
not a whole bunch of people that have just, oh, they weren't good fits or this or that. You may be the problem. And so, as we're looking at management here, just kind of as a whole, I think that this is one of the pieces that are essential for the company to run effectively because management is what makes sure that everybody's on the same process. Management is the one that makes sure that goals are met, and management is the one who really makes sure that everyone within the organization is rowing in the right direction. And if you are not effectively doing that for your team, you either need to find someone to do that for you and you pay them pretty significant salary to come in and do that, or
Yeah.
you go and you invest in coaching to figure out how you can more effectively manage your
Right.
team and be able to come in and say, this is the way that we're doing it. This is the policy. This is how we're going to do these things moving forward and get everybody on the same pathway.
Yep. Well, and I think at the end of the day, like from a very high level philosophical approach,
Mhm.
I think that if you view your team as just sort of this like machine that's built, right? And I have to have the right pieces in the right place, then we'll be successful. I understand that why you think that. But the
Mhm.
reality is that your people they're not pieces of machinery, right? Like they're nuanced and they're motivated by different things. And there's a certain level of emotional intelligence that you have to have because pieces of machine just don't get up and walk out the door one day because they didn't like how things are going, right? And
Right.
so the way that I've always tried to approach managing salespeople is specifically like, I am here to make you successful, right? And of
Mhm.
course, that means the organization will be successful in turn, right? Like that's what we're all hoping for. But in terms of the daily interactions and the daily conversations that we have, like I want the people that I'm working with to know that I'm invested in their success.
Right.
And that to me is sort of table stakes of a great environment, right?
Mhm.
And so I don't know, I would just if that's not like your natural bend in terms of the way that you approach people that you manage, I'm not saying that you have to be family, and I'm not saying, like all
Right.
those things that we hear that honestly get thrown around with the term culture all the time.
Yeah.
You don't have to approach it that way, but I think it's important just to take a step back and say like, "Hey, this is a real person. They have a
Yeah.
family, they have interests, they have friends and there's causes that they care about, right? Like and ultimately we want to see that person thrive and be successful. And guess what? In the end, you may find that it's not the right environment for them, right?
Mhm.
There may be things that are just critical about your organization that everyone has to be aligned on, right? And if that alignment doesn't exist, then maybe we're not the best place. I'm not saying you have to keep people around forever, obviously, but I have personally witnessed firsthand how salespeople can be the best version of themselves as salespeople when they have that safety of knowing like,
Mhm.
oh, my manager or the owner of this business, like they are invested in making sure that I am successful, right?
Absolutely.
And it's a little bit of a not a little bit. It's a shift, right? In
Right.
terms of what we're thinking. So, yeah.
The the way that I as we're coming to a wrap here, the way that I think about it is like, when you go to the zoo, right? And people can think what they want to think about a zoo, but you
Sure.
go through different exhibits and each animal is set up in their ideal habitat, right? You walk into the
Mm,
reptile tank and all of the snakes have their own separate environments that they need in order to be able to survive. But then, the zookeeper is going to feed them. They're going to make sure that their tank is clean. They're going to make sure all of that. So bringing that into work, right? Each of your departments needs their own ecosystem and
yeah.
environment to be able to survive. And everyone's is going to be a little bit nuanced depending on who you got working that department and what that department's specialty is. Sales is going to be whatever type of environment that salesperson needs, but you as the manager have to make sure that you're setting up that environment for that specimen, that species to be able to survive and thrive. Because if you put a polar bear in a very warm, humid tank, they're probably going to die. I don't know. I'm not a zoologist, but I'm imagining that it's probably just not going to be good for
Yeah.
them, right? Same thing if you put
Yep.
a snake into a frozen tundra, it's just not going to happen, right? It's not going to make sense. So making sure as a manager you're giving your salesperson the right environment, the right habitat, the right however you want to think about it in order for them to be able to survive, that's the most important thing that we can do.
Yeah, and I think that back to what we talked about, just having conversations, right? Like, I think that's one of the important things about the meetings that you have with your salesperson is to
Mhm.
be able to ask the questions about, how things are going, what's working, what's not working. Because if there isn't that opportunity to share those things, then I'm going to be the polar bear just sitting here sweating and saying, "Oh, everything's great. Yeah, it's fine. Like doing awesome, right? You've got to create the habitat where the conversation can even take place, right? And
Absolutely.
And again, like, I just feel like I need to say this again. What we are not saying is that you should tell your salesperson, yeah, if you want, you can take every Friday off if you want to. And like, it's not free reign. It's not like give your
Right.
salesperson anything that they want. But I think because of how mental sales can be, it's
Mhm.
really important to understand your person and what really drives them, excites them, motivates them for their role, right? Because people want different things. It's like any other
Absolutely.
role, and that alignment has to exist, or else it's not going to go well. So,
100%, Ben. All right. Final thoughts, parting shots. What do you have for us?
mm, yeah, great question. I think view your people as people, right? Like some of the old adages, like treat other people how you would want to be treated. If you're having a hard time relinquishing control, right, and you're trending more towards the micromanagement side, just encourage you put yourself in the position of your salesperson, even if you've never been in sales before, right? Like, would I like receiving this
Mm.
message? Right? How would this sort of communication make me feel? And the other thing I would say too is that the success of your salesperson does not come down solely to their level of grit and determination. You,
Absolutely.
you are a contributing factor, right?
Mhm.
That environment that you're creating ultimately plays a part in the success or failure. And so take ownership of that. And if you're feeling like things aren't working, it may be helpful just to ask the question of your salesperson, hey, what do you feel like is going well, and what do you feel like is not going well? How can I help you? How can I make you more successful? So that's my parting thought. Kristen, what about you?
Ooh, that was so good. I have nothing to add to that, Ben, because I think you summed it up absolutely perfectly.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm glad, my other parting thought is I'm glad to know that you didn't feel like I was micromanaging you at any point. So
No, absolutely not. Never once did I feel like
if
that,
there's
which is
one
a great.
takeaway from this episode, Ben is not a micromanager.
Yes, that I 100% endorse that fact.
Right.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for listening today and tune in for our next episode.
Bye bye.